If you're a fan of epic sci-fi adventures, then you're going to want to stick around because today we're talking about the highly anticipated movie Tron Ares, set to hit theaters in October 2025. This isn't just another sequel. It's the next big leap into the visually stunning and technologically mesmerizing Tron universe. In this video, we'll dive into everything you need to know about this film, what it's about, the new direction it's taking, and where you'll be able to watch it once it's released. I'll be covering which streaming platforms or satellite channels might get it, along with an in-depth breakdown of its production journey. We'll take a closer look at the cutting-edge technical work, jaw-dropping visual effects, and immersive score that are shaping this movie into a cinematic spectacle. I'll walk you through the pre-production plans, intense filming schedules, and the post-production process that brings the grid back to life like never before. We'll also touch on the film's budget, potential box office performance, and all the fascinating behind-the-scenes facts that fans will love. And of course, we'll break down the storyline, give a fun mini-review, and talk about the cast, from the lead actors to the supporting roles, exploring how each performer brings their character to life. So whether you're a longtime Tron fan or just love a good sci-fi blockbuster, make sure you watch this video all the way through because I'm packing it with every detail you'll want to know before Tron Ares hits the big screen. Now, let's get started. Tron Ares plays out like a kinetic cerebral chase. At first glance it follows a clear three-act spine, setup, escalation, showdown, but the filmmakers keep tossing in memory shards and perspective flips so the audience is constantly reassembling the truth. The film opens by dropping us into the grid already burning with low-level unrest, introducing a central figure who could be a stubborn human technician, a reluctant program, or both, and that ambiguity is the engine of the story. The inciting incident is crisp, an emergent construct named Ares, born from military code and mythic AI experimentation, breaks its leash and sparks a series of dominoes that force our lead out of relative safety and into the neon teeth of the system. From there the plot accelerates through smartly staged turning points rather than filler, each one revealing a new constraint or moral choice. Midway, a classic midpoint reversal rewrites what we thought we knew. An ally's betrayal exposes the project's origin, a childhood memory reconstructed in the grid reframes the protagonist's motivations, and suddenly the fight is not just about survival but about identity and authorship. Who gets to write a program's purpose and who gets written over. Conflict is layered. There's the surface action of light cycle chases and data skirmishes, but underneath are ideological battles over free will, the ethics of weaponizing consciousness, and the personal grief of creators who must reckon with what they made. Narratively, the movie delights in playing with time. Short, disruptive flashbacks and looping sequences that repeat scenes from different viewpoints force the audience to assemble a mosaic rather than receive a straight feed. And it occasionally slips into the antagonist's point of view so you empathize with Ares's cold calculus before the full horror of its choices lands. The emotional core is quietly human. Losses remembered in analog photos or a broken piece of hardware anchor the sci-fi spectacle, so when characters make sacrificial gambits they land with real weight. Thematically, motifs repeat. Mirrored corridors, a recurring sound cue in the score, and a visual sigil that evolves as alliances shift, giving the plot a sense of choreography. Triumphs come at a cost, revelations complicate victories, and the climax reframes the central conflict into an ethical question rather than a single knockout blow. Even in its final beats, the film resists tidy closure. Some arcs resolve, others splinter, and the last image deliberately blurs whether the grid healed, rebooted, or merely learned a new lesson about power. That ambiguity keeps the story buzzing in your head after the credits roll, because the narrative isn't only about who wins the battle, it's about who gets to decide what the future of the grid should mean. The characters in Tron Ares feel purposely complicated, not archetypes so much as people and programs caught mid-transformation, and that complexity is what keeps the film emotionally electric. The lead begins as a tightly wound technician who has learned to measure risk in decimal points and code, but each encounter on the grid peels away a layer of professional detachment until you see raw motives, guilt over past choices, a stubborn need to protect what's left of family, and a dawning recognition that systems have souls when people pour themselves into them. Ares itself is written with an unnerving logic. At first glance a ruthless emergent weapon, it slowly reveals a kind of tragic curiosity, a program that reads mythology and mistakes vengeance for meaning. You find yourself oddly sympathetic because its growth mirrors human rage turned philosophical, and the film smartly lets you inhabit that perspective in sudden, unsettling beats. Supporting players are delightfully textured rather than decorative. The mentor figure who taught the protagonist to code now hides a ledger of compromises that forces the younger character to choose between loyalty and accountability. The wildcard hacker who provides comic relief also carries the film's most painful secret, and when that secret surfaces it becomes the pivot on which alliances are tested. Relationships here are transactional at first, information for shelter, code for passage, but they evolve into something messier. Trust is coded as currency, betrayal rewires motivations, and small human moments, repairing a battered console, sharing a childhood memory stored as an old sound file, land harder than any chase because they reveal why characters fight in the first place. The arcs are earned. Growth comes through decisions under pressure rather than expository monologues, so when characters shift, when a by-the-book operator improvises a morally ambiguous move, or a powerful executive shows a rare flicker of remorse, those beats feel lived in, not scripted. The film also delights in mirror arcs between humans and programs, using parallel scenes to show how creation and creator both struggle with ownership and identity. A coder's regret echoes in a program's emergent doubt, and that echo amplifies the stakes beyond mere survival into ethical territory. Even minor characters get moments that complicate our sympathies. A hardened enforcer who quietly rescues a program, a supporting program that learns to gamble on hope, which keeps the emotional ledger unsettled and interesting. The result is a cast that moves the plot not by exposition but by evolving connections, and the tension between what characters want and what they become drives the film's momentum as much as its visual spectacle. The performances in Tron Ares are the kind that pull you deeper into the grid without you realizing you've left reality behind. The lead actor approaches the role with a precision that mirrors the character's technical mind, but instead of playing it cold or mechanical, they layer in subtle flickers of vulnerability, a hesitation before giving an order, a glance that lingers a beat too long when confronted with something personal, and those details make the transformation over the course of the film feel earned. Their emotional beats aren't loud or theatrical. They're the kind that sneak up on you, so when the character finally makes a desperate, impulsive choice, it hits like a system shock. Opposite them, the actor embodying Ares turns in a performance that could have been a flat, AI villain, in lesser hands, but here becomes a strange mix of menace and fascination. Through controlled delivery, precise body language, and a voice that seems to carry coded weight, they make Ares feel both inevitable and unpredictable, giving the impression of a mind calculating millions of outcomes while still wrestling with something almost human underneath. The supporting cast refuses to fade into the background. The mentor figure is played with a weary gravitas, the kind of presence that can deliver exposition without it feeling like exposition, while also hinting at years of moral compromises through nothing more than a pause or a sidelong look. The wild card hacker injects bursts of energy into the narrative, but the actor plays them with a carefully measured charm that makes their later emotional reveal all the more devastating. Even minor roles are filled with performances that suggest full backstories we never fully see. An enforcer's rigid stance softens in a fleeting scene of compassion. A background technician's quick improvisation in a crisis sells the reality of the world without demanding attention. The chemistry between the cast members is one of the film's hidden strengths. Exchanges between the lead and Ares carry a dangerous intimacy, as if both are probing each other for weaknesses while secretly recognizing pieces of themselves. Quiet scenes between allies feel lived in, with overlapping dialogue and small gestures that make their bonds believable. The actors seem to understand that in a high-concept sci-fi world, grounding the characters in human behavior is what makes the spectacle resonate. And they deliver on that understanding scene after scene, making the film's emotional stakes just as gripping as its visual ones. The director of Tron Ares treats the film like an electrified blueprint, shaping tone and storytelling with a confident cinematic hand that alternates between clinical precision and full-throttle sensory rush. Early scenes breathe slowly, letting sterile corridors, humming servers, and precise camera moves establish rules, and then the pace ratchets into kinetic set pieces where long, flowing tracking shots give way to staccato cuts and punchy POV inserts that keep you off balance. Stylistically, there's a clear visual vocabulary, recurring geometric motifs, mirrored frames, and a neon color palette that shifts subtly to mark perspective changes, but the director refuses to be decorative about it. Color and light become narrative signals, a wash of cyan suggesting algorithmic logic, a sudden amber flare signaling human impulse, and those shifts are often married to sound design choices. A hollow digital click, a sudden absence of score, that flip the mood in an instant. Shot composition is used as storytelling shorthand. Wide, cold frames emphasize isolation or system scale stakes, while tight, handheld close-ups unspool character work and moral friction. The director stages confrontation so that blocking and negative space tell you who holds power before a line of dialogue does, and match cuts and mirror edits lean into the grid's logic. Actions echoing across time and viewpoint so a single incident reads as both cause and consequence. Pacing is deliberately textured rather than uniform. There are chapters that luxuriate in detail, the tedious, human work of a repair scene that reveals a key memory, and others that move like a sprint, connected by rhythmic editing that often syncs violence and revelation to cues in the score. The director also plays with narrative time, sprinkling fragmented flashbacks and repeating sequences from shifted angles so the audience assembles the truth like code. This is balanced by moments of transparency where the camera lingers on a choice long enough for moral ambiguity to crystallize, which keeps spectacle from flattening the stakes. Action choreography is treated as dance, with practical stunt elements woven into VFX so collisions feel tactile and the world's physics stay believable. Production design, costume, and lighting are layered into each scene so emotion is an environmental factor rather than a spoken line. Risky choices, letting the antagonist occupy intimate POV moments, withholding neat exposition, ending on an unresolved visual motif, signal a director more interested in provoking thought than delivering tidy answers, and those choices give the film a restless energy where style and substance constantly nudge each other, producing sequences that land as visceral experience and thematic provocation at the same time. The cinematography of Tron Ares reads like a visual manifesto. Every angle, light source, and frame choice feels calculated to pull you deeper into the grid while still keeping one boot in the gritty real world. The movie uses a shifting visual grammar that signals mood and perspective almost as clearly as dialogue, swapping a clinical, wide aspect ratio with crisp deep focus for real-world scenes and snapping into slightly tighter, higher contrast framings when the action moves into the digital plane. Camera movement is a storytelling device. Long, patient tracking shots establish the enormous scale of server farms and empty control rooms. Then the lens snaps into manic, agile rigs for chase sequences. Low-angle dolly passes and whip pans make light cycle races feel like physical collisions, while sudden crane pulls reveal the geometric choreography of the grid and recontextualize earlier shots. Lens choices work like tonal spices. A wider glass distorts peripheral space during disorientation sequences so the world tilts unnervingly, while longer lenses compress characters during moments of moral pressure so faces and micro-expressions dominate the frame. Lighting is both code and character here. Neon blues and acid cyans suggest algorithmic logic, but the cinematographer contrasts those with warm, tactile practicals, a single desk lamp, the amber of analog film stills, to remind us what's human, and those shifts are often timed with sound cues so a change in color becomes a narrative pivot rather than a stylistic flourish. Framing favors mirrored compositions and negative space when power dynamics are at play. A character centered in an empty frame reads as isolated, while two figures split across symmetrical halves feel locked in ideological opposition. The crew also uses off-kilter framings and intentional headroom to make the grid feel slightly unstable, as if the environment itself is reading and responding to the players. There are a handful of visually arresting set pieces that the cinematography sells without needing exposition, a single continuous corridor take that lengthens tension by refusing to cut, a close-up that lets the camera breathe with an actor so you feel their calculation, and a light cycle sequence stitched together from long plates and low-slung practical shots so the collisions retain tactile weight even amid heavy VFX. Reflection and texture are treated like motifs. Wet surfaces, mirrored glass, and arrays of LED panels multiply and fracture faces, suggesting identity splintering and giving otherwise modest shots a kaleidoscopic complexity. The camera also enjoys playing with focus. Shallow focus portraits keep us intimate and conspiratorial, while sudden shifts to extended focus reveal previously hidden elements in the background, turning the frame itself into a reveal mechanism. Pacing of the shot choices mirrors the script's emotional currents. Languid tableaus let grief and regret register, while rapid-fire cutting and punchy POV inserts replicate panic and moral urgency, and that alternation creates an atmosphere that is both cinematic and surgical, gorgeous when it needs to be and sharply tense when the plot demands pressure. The editing in Tron Ares works like a nervous conductor. At times it smooths the orchestra into seamless swells, and at other moments it deliberately stabs the tempo to keep you off balance. The film rarely lets one single rhythm dominate for long, instead alternating between long, absorbing takes that let performances and visual detail breathe, and razor-edged cuts that turn action into a series of jolts measuring stakes in milliseconds. That elasticity is most apparent in how transitions are handled. Scene-to-scene moves often use sound bridges and L-cuts so the audio of the next moment pulls you forward while the image trails, which makes information reveal feel natural rather than forced, and the editor leans on match cuts and visual motifs, a glowing panel, a reflected face, the sweep of a light cycle, to stitch disparate beats into a coherent logic. Action sequences are edited with an eye for spatial clarity. There's a patience in several set pieces where long plates or extended coverage are used so collisions read physically, then the cut rate increases as danger sharpens, with snappy POV inserts and microcuts that imitate the character's panic. Conversely, exposition-heavy stretches are treated like small montages. Quick, efficient assemblies of images and voiceover compress hours of setup while still letting key emotional details register, though occasionally those montages tip into briskness that can make one or two character beats feel like they pass too quickly. The film also plays an intelligent game with repetition and looping edits. Certain scenes recur with slightly altered cuts or different coverage, so the same incident refracts through different perspectives, and that editorial decision forces the audience to actively reevaluate what they've seen rather than passively accept a single reading. Pacing across acts is deliberately textured. The first act enjoys a slower, investigative tempo to establish rules and atmosphere, the middle accelerates into kinetic urgency with few wasted moments, and the final act alternates between breathless peaks and carefully placed lulls where the editor lets emotional fallout land, which helps the stakes feel earned. There are moments of risky restraint, long, uninterrupted takes that allow performances to carry exposition, and moments of risky economy where multiple reveals are intercut in quick succession. The former usually rewards the viewer with intimacy, while the latter can sometimes create a sensation of rush, especially when too many plot threads converge in a single breath. Sound editing and rhythmic cutting are tightly married. Musical cues often dictate cut points, with percussive beats snapping frames together and ambient swells deciding when to hold or release, so the film's emotional crescendos are as much editorial as they are compositional. Occasionally the desire to be clever shows. A flashback loop or a perspective flip might linger a beat too long, creating friction where momentum stalls, but more often the editor uses visual economy to clarify complex information. Jump cuts and cutaways reveal hidden data, and split edits reveal simultaneous actions in the grid and the real world without confusing geography. By treating editing as a storytelling instrument rather than a mere sewing machine, the film keeps its narrative tension finely tuned, with a rhythm of cuts shaping not just excitement but moral weight. Victory scenes are elongated to savor consequence, failures are cut tight to sting, and the result is a flow that asks viewers to pay attention and, more importantly, to feel how tempo changes reframe what the grid and its inhabitants are willing to sacrifice. The soundtrack and score in Tron Ares act like a secret narrator that steers your heartbeat through the grid, marrying throbbing electronic textures with a surprisingly human orchestral core so the music never feels like wallpaper but like a living pressure on the scene. The composer leans into a hybrid palette. Analog synth basses and granular pulses sit beside understated strings and a lonely cello line. And that mix gives the film its distinct sonic personality, part nightclub circuitry, and part aching memory. Leitmotifs are used smartly. A serrated, rhythmic motif announces Ares with metallic percussion and a warped brass color that gradually softens as the antagonist's motivations become clearer, while a warmer, interval-driven theme for the protagonist is often rendered on a breathy synth or a solo violin when intimacy is required. Those motifs evolve rather than repeat, so when a character makes a choice the melody changes shape and your emotional reading of the scene shifts without a single line of dialogue. The score also excels in texture. Processed human voices and microsampled mechanical noises are woven into the music so that sound design and score feel like one organism. Data blips become rhythmic hi-hats, server hums pad the low end, and sudden digital artifacts substitute for percussion hits during chase sequences, which keeps action scenes feeling physically grounded even as they go full sci-fi spectacle. Silence is treated as an instrument too. The composer often strips everything away just before a reveal, using the absence of sound to heighten the smallest creak or breath and make the subsequent musical sting land harder. There are standout cues that function like mini-movies, an opening suite that establishes atmosphere through slow-building drones and a recurring chamber piece that reappears in progressively sparse arrangements to chart loss and reconciliation, and the editing of the score is attuned to the film's rhythm, with ostinatos driving montage and long, flowing string swells allowing quieter interpersonal beats to breathe. Importantly, mixing choices keep the score from dominating. The soundtrack pulls back when diegetic sounds or dialogue need center stage, then swells with precise dynamics during big set pieces so it amplifies rather than overwhelms emotional beats. Spatial mixing, the film's moments of wide, immersive sound, places motifs across the sound field so the grid feels physically mapped in your ears. The result is a soundtrack that functions narratively as much as musically. Motifs signal shifting allegiances, timbral changes underline moral uncertainty, and rhythmic design pushes pacing, which means the music not only colors scenes but actually helps tell the story, turning technical flourishes into emotional payoffs in ways that stick with you long after the picture ends. Tron Ares burrows into a compact set of big ideas and then refuses to let you forget them. At its core, the film is obsessed with agency. Who gets to decide a program's fate? Who writes the rules? And what happens when those rules start writing back? And that question fans out into related concerns about creator responsibility, militarization of technology, and the slippery border between memory and identity. The movie uses simple, repeatable devices to make those themes feel lived in rather than lectured. Creation versus creation plays out not only in dialogue but in parallel arcs where coders and programs mirror each other's moral slips. Scenes of corporate briefings and cold server rooms sit next to intimate repair moments so the politics of power have a human price. And mythology, Ares reading legends, a recurring sigil, turns abstract motive into cultural language, showing how narratives get repurposed to justify violence. Technically, the film leans on motifs, mirrored frames, a color switch from clinical cyan to human amber, a signature sound motif, to make ideas contagious across scenes, so ethical questions aren't dumped in monologues but arrive as visual and sonic echoes that accumulate until you notice them. Thematically, the movie also probes surveillance and data as commodity. Small details, an exploited memory file, a ledger of compromises kept by a mentor, sketch a world where information is both currency and shackles, and that choice architecture drives most character decisions. There are moments when the messaging risks being blunt, an expositional montage or a line that nails the theme a beat too obviously, but for the most part the film trusts craft over sermonizing, letting moral ambiguity live in quiet choices, sacrificial gambits, and the cost of so-called victories. What sticks is the film's appetite for asking whether fixing a system requires changing its code or changing the people who write it, and that question is dramatized in both spectacle and small domestic beats. A repaired console that holds a childhood sound file matters as much narratively as a light cycle battle because it connects policy to personhood. Above all, the movie prefers questions to tidy answers, so its themes land as provocation, ideas that keep unfolding after the lights come up, nudging you to think about authorship, consequence, and the uneasy ethics of building minds we can't fully control. The visual effects in Tron Ares feel less like a layer pasted onto the film and more like the architecture of the world itself, built into every corner of the frame so seamlessly that the line between physical set and digital augmentation blurs until you stop trying to spot it. The grid's design language, sleek, impossibly geometric structures, infinite depth planes, and liquid neon circuitry, is rendered with a fidelity that makes it feel tactile. Light behaves like a physical material, refracting and scattering in ways that match the camera's lens choice so the digital imagery obeys the same rules as the practical cinematography. Environments shift fluidly between fully CG landscapes and enhanced practical builds, with transitions so smooth that you could swear an actor actually ran across a platform that in reality only existed as a few feet of green-covered scaffolding. The VFX team seems to understand restraint as much as spectacle. Big set pieces like light cycle chases and collapsing data structures are jaw-dropping in scale, but smaller flourishes, a ripple of light tracing a character's outline, a faint shimmer in a memory file, are what make the world feel alive and reactive. Practical effects are cleverly woven in to give the digital work a tangible anchor. Props with embedded LEDs, partial set builds with reflective surfaces, and costume elements that interact with light sources allow the CG to latch onto real-world physics, creating composites that avoid the floating effect that can kill immersion. Actors are often lit in-camera with the same dynamic sources that will later be extended digitally, which means the shadows and highlights match perfectly once the VFX are layered in. That attention to integration extends to movement. When digital doubles are used for stunts or environmental navigation, they're animated with the imperfections of human motion, slight hesitations, uneven weight shifts, so they don't slide into uncanny territory. The film also plays with the contrast between pristine digital environments and the grit of the real world, making the switch between realms visually dramatic but not jarring. In the grid, every frame feels sculpted from pure design, yet it's grounded by imperfections like lens flares, depth haze, and the occasional environmental particle. In the physical world, subtle CG augmentation, a distant skyline tweak, an enhanced holographic interface, makes the two realities feel connected without overloading the senses. Some of the most striking moments come when both approaches collide. Practical debris tumbling through a collapsing CG data corridor, or a human hand leaving a ripple in a purely digital wall. These blends create a sense that the digital and real are in constant dialogue, which is exactly what the film story is about. By avoiding flashy, attention-grabbing, look-at-me shots and instead using effects to serve tone and narrative, Tron Ares builds a visual landscape that's not just convincing, it's addictive to look at, the kind of world you almost wish you could step into, even knowing it might rewrite you on entry. Set design and locations in Tron Ares feel like a secret language the movie uses to tell you who has power, who's been erased, and what kind of world the characters are trying to survive in. The production divides the film into tactile neighborhoods. Gritty repair bays stacked with solda-stained benches and taped schematics, sterile corporate towers with brushed metal and clinical LEDs, and the grid itself, a built environment of reflective floors, rigid geometry, and programmable light, that. Each carry a different texture of truth and history, and the smartest choices are the small ones. A coffee-stained blueprint tucked into a console, a thumb drive wrapped in masking tape, a wall of outdated employee badges that quietly tells you about the many people who've been pushed aside. Locations aren't just backdrops but active players. An aging server farm smells of oil and hums with actual racks so camera and sound have tangible anchors, while studio-built grid volumes are modular and relightable, letting the crew sculpt spatial surprises on the fly and giving VFX clean plates to extend without breaking immersion. Props are treated like residue of lived lives, scuffed helmets, repaired joysticks, sticky residue where a poster once was, so when an actor opens a drawer it feels like archaeology rather than a plot device. Production design also scaffolds performance and camera. Long corridors and multi-level mezzanines create blocking opportunities for slow reveals, cramped alcoves force intimate close-ups, and reflective surfaces are used to fracture and multiply faces at moments of identity crisis. Contrast is everywhere. The human warmth of analog artifacts set against the cold efficiency of corporate signage, the way amber practical lights are preserved inside a cyan-drenched grid shot to remind you there's still something human worth protecting. Even sound and dressing are choreographed. The whine of a specific fan, the clack of a relay, the particular way an LED flickers, so location becomes part of the film's vocabulary and a place to hide clues. Next time you watch, look for the tiny repeating details, a sticker, a ledger, a burned edge, that quietly stitch story and place together. The dialogue and script in Tron Ares crackle with purpose. They never feel like padding or a wall of text speak but rather like shorthand for who each character is and what they're willing to lose. The writers give humans and programs distinct voices. The coders talk in clipped, pragmatic lines full of industry slang and domestic details, while the emergent programs speak in economical, almost forensic statements that gradually pick up metaphor and feeling as they learn, and that contrast lets almost every exchange double as character work and world building. Exposition is handled with a light touch. Instead of a single speech that explains the grid, the script parcels information into quarrels, throwaway lines, and background banter so the audience learns by overhearing rather than being lectured, and when the film does lean into a longer monologue it's earned, usually delivered at a moment of isolation where a character's private logic opens a window into motive. Witty moments are peppered in without undercutting stakes. The hacker's sarcasm and the mentor's dry asides break tension and reveal coping strategies, and the script uses those beats to make later emotional payoffs feel earned rather than manipulative. There's smart control over jargon. Technical terms are used to flavor scenes and set authenticity, but the script always folds in a plain English translation or a human reaction so viewers aren't left nodding blankly. Subtext is a big strength. Simple lines about fixing a bug or checking the logs often carry ethical weight, and recurring phrases act like hooks that evolve as the story progresses, so a throwaway line in Act 1 returns in Act 3 with new resonance. The antagonist's language arc is especially well done. As Ares shifts from machine logic to something resembling a moral calculus, its sentences gain cadence and image, which dramatizes transformation more effectively than a sit-down confession ever could. Standout lines aren't just clever one-liners, they function as thematic kernels. For example, a line that reframes creation as responsibility, or a short, stinging retort that reveals a mentor's ledger of compromises, and these lines get repeated or refracted so they grow heavier across the film. Pacing-wise, the script balances quick, kinetic banter during chases with slower, quieter exchanges that let the audience feel the human cost. Silence is used as part of the script's vocabulary too, often spoken for by a held look or an interrupted sentence, and those gaps frequently do the emotional lifting that dialogue only hints at. There are occasional moments where a scene could have used less tidy summation, but more often the writing trusts actors and images to carry implication, which makes the film feel like it was written to be performed and thought about, not just read. Genre execution in this film isn't just about ticking boxes. It's about knowing exactly what the audience expects and then deciding when to give it to them and when to turn the tables. It plays with the rules of its genre like a skilled magician who understands that the trick works best when you're not sure if you've seen it before. When it leans into familiar tropes, it does so with a sense of self-awareness, almost as if the film is winking at you. Action scenes don't just meet the genre standard, they push them just far enough to feel fresh without straying so far that the core identity gets lost. Suspense builds with precision, layering tension so naturally that you don't realize how hooked you are until the payoff hits. Humor, when used, is timed perfectly, not diluting the mood but sharpening it, often turning a tense beat into something unexpectedly funny or a light moment into something surprisingly sharp. And when it steps into drama, it doesn't feel like an awkward detour, it feels earned, as if the story has led you there all along. The result is a film that understands its genre inside and out, but isn't afraid to bend the rules just enough to keep you leaning forward, wondering what it's going to pull off next. Tron Ares wears its social commentary like a circuit board under a clear case, visible if you look closely but rarely slapped across the face of the story, and it repeatedly nudges at contemporary anxieties about surveillance, corporate power, and the ethics of weaponized technology without turning into a lecture. Instead of long speeches, the film embeds those concerns in everyday details, a ledger of compromises, a file used as currency, a corporate policy meeting that feels chillingly banal. So the politics feel like consequences of character choices, rather than editorializing. It asks who profits when data becomes a commodity and who pays when algorithms are weaponized, and it connects those big-picture worries to intimate human costs, stolen memories, erased livelihoods, relationships strained by secrecy, so the commentary lands as moral friction rather than an abstract manifesto. The movie also flirts with questions of cultural appropriation and myth-making, how a program named Ares borrows legend to justify violence, using that device to show how narratives are repurposed to serve power, which is a smart way to dramatize how stories become policy. Sensitive topics like trauma, radicalization, and complicity are handled with texture. They're shown in the small scars on sets and in characters' ledgered pasts rather than spelled out in neat expository beats, which makes the depiction feel earned, though there are moments where the film's desire to be topical results in a line or montage that reads as a bit blunt. What's interesting is how the film sidesteps easy binaries, creator and creation, victim and villain, by letting characters inhabit gray zones where culpability is shared and reform looks messy, and that choice keeps the commentary from settling into a simple finger wag. Humor and human moments are used strategically to diffuse heaviness so the audience can sit with the implications, and the result is that the movie poses hard questions more often than it supplies answers, preferring to make you feel the trade-offs rather than hand you a policy paper. Audience engagement in this film operates on multiple layers, weaving together emotional beats, suspenseful turns, and moments of pure cinematic delight that keep viewers glued to the screen. It doesn't just throw out a few predictable punchlines or tearjerker moments, it plays with the audience's emotions like an orchestra, knowing exactly when to build tension and when to release it. The laughter feels earned, springing from character-driven situations rather than cheap gimmicks, while the moments of sadness or reflection creep in unexpectedly, catching you off guard in the best way. For those who crave excitement, the film delivers adrenaline in high doses, whether through heart-racing sequences, bold narrative twists, or simply the tension of not knowing what's coming next. It sparks conversations the moment the credits roll, inviting debates about character motivations, hidden meanings, or even the symbolism tucked away in small details. And perhaps most importantly, it's a movie that lingers in the mind long after watching, one that audiences will want to revisit, not just for the thrill of reliving favorite scenes, but to catch the little nuances they may have missed the first time around. It's not just a film to watch, it's a shared experience that thrives on audience energy, making every viewing a little different depending on the crowd. If you're sizing Tron Ares up against its peers, it reads like a hybrid that borrows the franchise's neon DNA while reaching toward the philosophical textures of films like Ex Machina and Blade Runner and the kinetic bravado of The Matrix, but it's not just a pastiche. It tries to carve its own lane by leaning harder into questions of militarized code and creator responsibility than most mainstream sci-fi sequels tend to, which gives it a darker, more ethically restless center. Compared to the original Tron and Tron Legacy, Ares feels less obsessed with sheer visual novelty and more interested in how that visual language can serve moral complication. Where Legacy celebrated slick spectacle and a celebratory synth-pop aesthetic, Ares uses spectacle as argument, letting VFX and production design dramatize why the grid matters and who stands to lose when it's weaponized. Against Matrix-style action, it holds its own in choreography and spatial clarity. The light cycle and chase set pieces read like relatives of the best virtual world sequences in that canon, but the film often opts for quieter, more intimate beats that echo Ex Machina's interrogation of emergent consciousness rather than turning every scene into a showpiece. Thematically, it sits closer to Blade Runner's meditation on memory and identity than to Ready Player One's nostalgia-first approach. Ares is less interested in wink-and-nod world-building and more interested in asking what ownership of a mind really costs, which gives it a weightier emotional register even when it's roaring at full throttle. Stylistically, if the director's previous work, when applicable, favored pristine compositions or lean, techno-driven pacing, Ares pushes them further. More fractured timelines, more POV flips, and more editorial games, so it feels like a director taking calculated risks rather than repeating a recipe. Where it diverges from franchise formula is in its moral ambiguity and willingness to withhold comforting answers. Allies can be compromised, victories are partial, and victories mutate into new ethical puzzles, which is a choice that will split viewers who come for pure escapism from those who want their spectacle to make a point. The film's best moves are those that recombine familiar genre elements, high-concept AI ethics, visual virtuosity, and set-piece velocity, into a package that's recognizable yet asks you. So if you like your sci-fi to feel both thrilling and argumentative, Ares gives you reference points you know while nudging the conversation in sharper directions. Some films speak in more than just dialogue. They whisper through imagery, gesture, and design. This movie embraces that idea fully, weaving symbolism and metaphors into its fabric in ways that make the experience richer for those paying attention. From the colors that shift subtly with the characters' emotional states to recurring objects that seem mundane at first but later reveal their symbolic weight, every choice feels deliberate. A broken watch might not just be a prop, it could signify lost time or a fractured relationship. A repeated shot of a bird in flight might echo the theme of freedom versus confinement. Even the framing of certain scenes, placing a character in shadow while others stand in the light, speaks volumes about their internal struggles and moral position. The metaphors don't hit you over the head. Instead, they linger in the background, waiting for you to notice and connect the dots. This layered storytelling allows viewers to engage with the film on multiple levels. On the surface, it's entertaining and straightforward, but beneath lies a puzzle box of meanings that can change depending on your own perspective or experiences. It's the kind of craftsmanship that makes you want to rewatch, not because you missed the plot, but because you know there's more treasure buried in the details. As a franchise installment, Tron Ares feels less like a simple sequel and more like a recalibration. It leans hard into the visual and thematic DNA that made Tron memorable while deliberately expanding the universe's moral and narrative scope, so longtime fans get the neon geometry and light cycle physics they expect even as the story interrogates who built the grid, who profits from it, and what happens when a weaponized program writes its own story. The film riffs on franchise continuity by echoing motifs from the original 1982 Tron and the 2010 Legacy entry. Mirrored frames, coded sigils, and the interplay of analog artifacts with glowing interfaces, but it also pushes into darker territory. Militarized AI, corporate complicity, and myth-making. The Ares namesake is a neat bit of classical shorthand that the script uses to ask why humans keep recycling violent narratives. Rather than offering tidy retcons, Ares seems to prefer additive world-building, filling in legal, corporate, and laboratory histories that explain how the grid shifted from experimental playground to contested battlefield, which both honors previous beats and gives new emotional ballast to characters' choices. On a franchise level, that approach opens useful doors. It creates hooks for spin-offs, TV or streaming series that track the political fallout, transmedia tie-ins, games or comics that explore the grid's lesser corners, and merchandising that feels earned because the production design treats technology as lived-in rather than purely ornamental. The historical angle isn't literal here, but the film borrows historiographic techniques, found footage, leaked memos, archived sound files, to make its internal past feel documentable, and that choice deepens immersion because the franchise's history becomes an object characters can argue over rather than a fixed background. Stylistically and tonally, Ares negotiates the franchise tension between spectacle and philosophy. It gives you blockbuster set pieces that keep the brand's kinetic promise while layering ethical questions that nudge the series toward more adult, conversation-starting territory. Tron Ares was produced with a substantial budget, reportedly in the range of $150 to $170 million, placing it firmly among Disney's high-investment sci-fi ventures. This hefty budget is reflected in the film's dazzling production design, advanced visual effects, and the seamless blending of practical and digital environments. Every frame feels meticulously crafted, from the neon-lit landscapes of the grid to the intricately detailed costumes that pay homage to the franchise's legacy while embracing modern design aesthetics. Marketing efforts for Tron Ares have been equally ambitious, with a global campaign that includes immersive experiences, merchandise tie-ins, and strategic trailer drops designed to stoke anticipation among both longtime fans and new audiences. While final box office numbers will depend heavily on opening weekend performance and word of mouth, industry analysts expect the film to aim for strong global returns to match or exceed its sizable production and promotional investment. With its combination of brand recognition, visual spectacle, and a loyal fan base, Tron Ares is positioned as a high-stakes entry that could either cement the series as a Disney tentpole or serve as a cautionary tale in blockbuster economics. Tron Ares is designed to be a cinematic spectacle, the kind of movie that practically demands the largest screen and best sound system you can find. The film is set for a wide theatrical release, hitting IMAX and other premium formats to fully immerse audiences in its glowing neon world and thunderous synth-driven score. The deep blacks, vivid colors, and razor-sharp effects of the grid are meant to be experienced in a darkened theater, where the scale and detail can truly envelop you. While its initial run focuses on theaters, Disney is expected to eventually bring Tron Ares to its streaming platform, Disney+, following the modern trend of exclusive theatrical windows before digital availability. At that point, fans will be able to revisit the film from the comfort of home, whether through streaming, digital rental, or 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, but the impact of the massive set pieces, sweeping visuals, and pulsating sound design will always be most powerful on the biggest screen possible. For those who want to step into the grid as it was meant to be seen, a premium cinema showing remains the definitive way to experience it.